That's right, folks. Another episode of the Razzball Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, Bobby LaMarco, and today we're going to be breaking down some middle round fades. That's right. You're probably thinking to yourself, middle round fades? Every player should be safe. That is not true, folks. There is landmines in the middle rounds, and there's guys you should be taking over them. We're going to break down 5 players starting right now on the Razzball Fantasy YouTube channel. And of course, we're talking fades. And the one person I'm not fading on today's show is Derek Favret. You can follow him, Derek_Favret on Twitter. What's going on, Derek?
How you doing, Bobby?
I'm good, man. It's a question for you. Before we get started, I got a quick question of the day for you. How do you feel about the Bo Nix situation being named the starter? I know you're kind of our QB rankings guy. So what's your first reactions?
Yeah, I like it. I think that's the right decision. I was kind of expecting that, actually. I did my quarterback updates the other day, and I brought him up a little bit. I brought him up to 21, expecting that he would get the starting nod. I might actually bring him up a little higher. So, yeah, I think it's the right call for Denver. I hope he plays well, because I've got some of his receivers across all my fantasy teams, and I need him to play well.
I will say this. Obviously, Jarrett Stidham didn't really get you too excited in general anyway, but there has been a long history of rookie quarterbacks, the impacts they have on the other players on fantasy rosters. Like, I will say this, Courtland Sutton doesn't necessarily have a crazy ceiling anymore. I think rookie quarterbacks typically do have a little bit of tight ends and running backs aren't as impacted by rookies, but just be aware of that when you're drafting. Courtland Sutton's not going too early, and he's not a full fade based on his ADP, but just remember that, like, the Russell Wilson situation last year, for I know Russell wasn't good, but he was good with Courtland Sutton. That's why he had so many touchdowns. So you have to remember that. So I do think that Sutton has maybe top 36 value this season, but I'm not overly excited to go after him personally. All right. You got more? Do you want to say something else before we get started?
No. Let's hit it. Last week we had some disagreements. Let's see what we do today.
Honestly, first off, I want to shout out Jamie. Thank you for joining as always, Jamie. We appreciate you being on. Today we're going to be talking 5 middle round fades in 2024. Now, the key part here is, listen, these are guys that, honestly, in the middle rounds, I'm noticing in rounds 5, 6, 7, 8, etc., that based on the ADP and where I have them in my rankings, I probably will have 0 shares of them. And let's start with Tank Dell. Now, this was probably going to be a hard pill to swallow. And honestly, let me just break it down for everybody. First off, you have to understand the precedent that is happening right now. There is 3 really good wide receivers on the same team. Stephon Diggs is not washed, by the way. I think people want him to be washed and just go away. He will demand targets. We saw last year Adam Thielen, with the right situation, actually play better than he did with Kirk Cousins. So I don't want to just dismiss him. Then you have Nico Collins, who I think already was the 1A versus Tank Dell. And so when you just zoom out for a minute, you think to yourself, well, how many elite wide receiver trios has there ever been? Well, I took a trip down memory lane, and I went all the way back to 2007 to see what are the most efficient, high-scoring wide receiver groups since 07, okay? There was 9 teams since 2007 that had over 50 PPR fantasy points at the wide receiver position. That is crazy elite, okay? Those are very rare. That's only 9 since 2007. So teams like the 2007 Patriots, the 2011 Packers, the 2018 Bucks, there's a bunch of great scenarios too. But the concerning part was that the wide receiver 3 on those teams averaged 11.2 PPR points per game. And that is wide receiver 3-ish, maybe wide receiver 4 numbers. That's like top 48 wide receiver numbers. And so just from that, and we're talking about some of the most prolific passing offenses ever, and there typically seems to be a pecking order. Now, on average, those teams probably average, I think it was, so I just want to take another viewpoint too. And I said, what's the most recent examples of 3 really good receivers? Forget about the greatest of all time or the big scoring teams. There were 6 scenarios where there, in my recent sample I did. And I think last year with the Jaguars is a good example of this. You know, the 2020 Cowboys, when they brought in CeeDee Lamb, a lot of these are when they bring in a rookie at the first round. Jackson Smith-Njigba comes to mind last year with the Seahawks with Metcalf and Lockett. When I looked at those most recent samples, even like the Bengals too, with Jamar Chase, Tyler Boyd, and T. Higgins, the wide receiver 3 in those offenses averaged 11.5 PPR points per game. Are you noticing a theme here? It's like 11 fantasy points. Now, I think Tank Dell does get the benefit of the doubt, and he does offer a little more upside, and I'm not ranking him that low, but where he's going right now, I don't think he offers you much more of a ceiling without an injury to Diggs or Nico Collins. What's your thoughts, Derek?
Yeah, I agree. There's just a lot of mouths to feed there. And, we came out of last year, thinking Nico Collins, Tank Dell, which one is going to be the number one. But, and of course they add Stephon Diggs to it, like you said. But when you actually peel back the onion there, Tank Dell had no games where he had more than 8 receptions. None. That's definitely not the impression that we came back with. And, he finished 9 games total, and he had touchdowns in 6 of those 9. And that's where, that's why he had such a fantasy impact that he did. But, do we think that he can do that again? I mean, I think that's really hard to get on board that. And then one thing, just as an aside that I found when I did my research in preparation for this, we have a new tool at Razzball. We're doing home road splits. Well, Tank Dell last year had 40% more fantasy points on the road than he did at home last year.
That's weird.
40%.
How's that happen?
3 times more points, fantasy points on turf, and twice as many indoors. Yeah,
that makes.
Yeah, so that's really kind of a strange phenomenon there for him, and what that means is I don't think you can trust him. And then the fact that you add someone like Stephon Diggs there, you got Dalton Schultz there again. He's just not a player I think you can really trust. So yeah, at this middle round, where a lot of these guys are just, players to fill on your roster, he's one that I'm going to fade.
Yeah, I've done, and here's the other thing too. It's an interesting nugget. So I've talked about this a bunch. And I do this thing called points per reception, and essentially how many fantasy points a wide receiver generates every time they catch the ball. So essentially it's just factoring how many yards and touchdowns they get when they catch. He averaged 3.4 fantasy points per reception. That is number 6 all time in my sample. And that is like even guys like A.J. Brown and those efficient receiver seasons, once they started getting volume, they started dipping down to like the high 2s. So that's something to keep an eye on, and I just don't know if the volumes. I mean, listen, I in an ideal world, it would be just 3 really good guys all split it evenly. It just never really works out that way. And then Dalton Schultz isn't going to go anywhere. Now you have Joe Mixon, who's going to be more of a prominent guy in the run game too. So I'm all in on CJ Stroud. That's what I've gathered from the analysis. I just can't wait to see him. I have him in a bunch of leagues, but overall, I'll be fading the third option potentially in this offense. Let's jump down to the next player. It's David Njoku. So when I really kind of look at the Browns, I kind of don't care about Joe Flacco. Flacco is just Christmas baby Jesus. Like literally, you could put the Mount Rushmore of people, Joe Flacco, not even football players. We just love the Joe Flacco. And Njoku went berserk with Flacco. So, but we do have a decent sample size of Njoku with Deshaun Watson. And so in the 10 games in the 2-year span with Deshaun Watson, he averages only 5.4 targets, 8.9 PPR points per game. That would have been tight end 15 last year on a per game basis. And so when you look at the kind of the changes too, they brought in Jerry Jeudy. He is going to be a much more prominent number 2 option than anything else they had last year. They also brought in new OC Ken Dorsey. Now, I guess it's Dorsey's. I mean, listen, good for Kevin Stefanski. At least he brings somebody in. He's an offensive-minded coach, so I got to believe there's still some of the same principles in there too. But Dorsey comes in, and listen, the one thing that the feather in the cap is he comes from Carolina when they had Greg Olsen, so he has been a part of coaching staffs that have featured a really good tight end. But as the Bills OC, Dawson Knox averaged about 9 PPR points per game in 2022. And remember, Dalton Kincaid didn't take off last season until after they made the switch to Joe Brady. And of course, there's coupled with injuries there as well to guys like Gabe Davis, etc. So overall, I'm not getting aggressive on Njoku because of how he performed with Flacco down the stretch. What's your thoughts here, Derek?
Yeah, same for me. We know we've talked about it before. When you look at tight ends, there's definitely a cliff about the tight end 8, tight end 9 frame, and David Njoku is below that. So, yeah, for me as well, just for the reasons you said, and like you really I want to stress the signing of Judy, of the trading for Judy. I mean, David Njoku last year ran 40% of his routes from the slot. Most of that this year is probably going to go to Judy, who ran 73% of his routes last year from the slot. So, any or a lot of that production that we received from the slot last year, again, it's probably going to shift to Judy because of that, and just the fact that I'm not really a big fan of his quarterback. I'll just leave it at that. I really just don't see myself waiting for tight ends long enough to be in this range for Njoku. So yeah, I'm going to pass on him.
My late round guy is Jake Ferguson. Personally,
I love Jake Ferguson. Yeah, I agree.
That's been the guy I kind of, if I can't get one of the McBride, Kincaid kind of guys to fall. Like I'm still kind of at or a little below on Pitts in ADP. I've changed my tune on Pitts. I was way out on him early and I moved him way up. But at the same time, I'm not getting a lot of Pitts because I'm not getting aggressive on him. Ferguson's been the one guy, and also guys like Dallas Goedert and also Pat Freiermuth. And then probably Pat Freiermuth is probably my hottest take of the group, but Freiermuth could be locked in as the number 2. We just saw whether it's Justin Fields or even Russ Wilson. You know what? I just feel like the number 2 option in that offense is going to be fine. Even in Arthur Smith, by the way, who loves his tight ends. I mean, Jonnu Smith and Kyle Pitts last year were combined for a lot of fantasy points. So that's why I like there. But any final thoughts about Njoku before we move on?
Yeah, no, I'm a strong fade. Good call. Strong fade.
Let's jump down to the next one. It's Jayden Reed. Jayden Reed. So with Reed, it's like if you look at his stats last year, I mean, talk about touchdown regression. I mean, just the level of fantasy points that he got just from touchdowns is kind of absurd. But it's not that, it's a little bit of the fact that kind of a lot of things fell in place for him, and a lot of it has to do with Christian Watson. So when you look at the 2 receiver set for the Packers, majority of those sets are Watson and Dobbs. And then when they go to 3 receiver set, Reed comes in, and they also rotate in Wicks. The other problem is that they have really good 2 young tight ends in Musgrave and Kraft. So when I'm looking at the situation, I kind of don't. So look at Watson, for example. Christian Watson last year, 9 games played. The targets for Reed were 4.9 targets per game, 11.1 PPR points per game. The 7 games played without Watson last year for Reed, 7.1 targets, 16.5 PPR points per game. So a 5.5 fantasy point difference just from when Watson was out. And some of that has to do with the fact that Watson actually does get a decent amount of red zone targets, and Reed got a lot of those while he was out, which helped boost his touchdowns in those games. So I'm just not really excited. My guy this year is Romeo Doubs. I actually have him as my highest rated wide receiver, and I have a weird feeling he's kind of like a Stephon Diggs. If you look at early career, Stephon Diggs started ramping up, and in his 3rd year, he took off. And I think that's what's going to happen with Dobbs. What's your thoughts about Reed?
Yeah, same for me. If I'm able to get Jordan Love, I'm trying to stack him with Dobbs. I'm really staying away from Reed. I mean, he had 1 game with over 10 targets, just 1 double-digit targets, and only 1 game over 100 yards. So, and if you look at his ADP, he's going around at the Razzball consensus, he's got about 77, 78. And Ridley's there, Godwin's there, Deontay Johnson's there, Marquise Brown, if he's healthy, he's there, Xavier Worthy, kind of all in that range. I like all of those or most of those guys over Jayden Reed. I'm going to go, at that point in my draft and I'm filling wide receivers, depth really. I'm going to go with a guy more like those than Jayden Reed. So yeah, I'm a fade as well.
Yeah, let's jump over here. Jamie's obviously blowing up the chat. Jamie, he doesn't like any of the Texas ADP. Like, yeah, I mean, this is kind of reminds me a lot of the Seahawks situation last year when you just have a lot of good mouths to feed. These guys all kind of cancel each other out a little bit. So yeah, it definitely is something to be. I actually am a little bit lower than ADP on every one. I'm okay with Nico Collins because I think he's going to emerge as the number one, but I don't have any of them yet. I have not gotten a single, share of him in any of my teams. Van Pelt, this is a really good call out because Hunter Henry, by the way, it goes Pat Freiermuth, Hunter Henry, Tyler Conklin. Those are my 3 tight end guys that I'm getting, depending on who could fall. If I don't get Ferguson in the middle, like in that 7 range or something like that. I actually got Ferguson in round 10 this last draft, a 12-team league. I was like, okay, let's go. Pretty excited about all that. But Hunter Henry's a guy I really like, but he's been injured all off season, which is kind of annoying. And Austin Hooper has been getting a ton of work, but neither here or there. And of course, Jamie has to throw out a boo for Dobbs. It is what it is. All right, let's move to the next guy. It's Jordan Addison. And so I just want to reset some of the expectations for the Vikings without Kirk Cousins. Last season, and we talked about this a couple weeks ago, Derek. We talked about this on a previous podcast. Like, remember the 17-game pace for the Vikings without Kirk Cousins was like 5,400 passing yards and 30 touchdowns. Yeah. Sam Darnold's not throwing that, folks. Okay, the Nick Mullins games, he threw 4 interceptions in one game, and they were in full-on catch-up mode. And I believe that was the Lions game when they were playing indoors. I just don't really think that's going to be what Sam Darnold is. I like Sam Darnold. I'm extremely optimistic that Sam Darnold's going to keep Justin Jefferson as a top 10 wide receiver. However, if you start looking at the historical wide receiver 2s for Sam Darnold, it ain't so great. And part of this has to do with the fact this guy's never been surrounded with talent. And I get that. But let's start. Quincy Enunwa, way back in 2018, 8.1 PPR points per game. Robbie Anderson in 2019, 10 PPR points per game. Brashard Perriman and Robbie Anderson the following 2 seasons, 8 PPR points per game. So I understand Addison is better. But the problem is that's kind of your baseline. So if you think he's between 8 and 10 fantasy points, even if he's like 25% better, you're looking at probably low-end wide receiver 3, high-end wide receiver 4 numbers at best. If you think he's that much better. So the other problem is the TJ Hawkinson thing. People are going to say, well, Hawkinson's out. Okay, Hawkinson missed 2 games last year. He had 5.8 fantasy points in 1 and 15.7 in 2. So he was out-targeted by Johnny Munt in those 2 games. So the Vikings offense is still featuring the tight. And by the way, Johnny Munt might be one of those late guys you just throw on a bench because the Vikings love that role. Johnny Munt got a lot of work last year. He got a decent amount of targets in this offense. And I think they want to continue to have the same role when Hawkinson comes back eventually down the line. But I am just not interested. I think Sam Darnold might be good enough to prop up Jefferson for a top 10 wide receiver season. But that's it. What's your thoughts here?
Yeah, I'm not interested either. In fact, in addition to all the things you said, he's got the ankle injury right now. And, if there's ever a time where you need to gel with your new quarterback and that quarterback's being Sam Darnold, it's right now. And he's not getting those reps. And, he fizzled down the stretch as well, 8 receptions over the last 3 games. And, that's with a healthy Jefferson there, there's just not a lot to be excited about with Addison. He is a good player, but once Kirk Cousins packed his bags for Atlanta, he started taking on water. So yeah, I don't see it. I'm not going to have him anywhere. And Jackson Smith-Jigba is right there as well, and I'm going to take him every time before Jordan Addison. So yeah, I'm big fade on this one.
Derek has just been Derek's my favorite person of the day. Congratulations, Derek. You have won the honor. It's a huge moment for Derek today. Honestly, pre-show did a bunch of great stuff. Now he's talking up JSN. I'm in on Derek. Before we get to the final player, I want to make sure everybody knows they have a bunch of great content over on razzball.com. After the show, go jump over to football.razzball.com and check out all our great articles from our great writers like Derek, Jeff, Matt, Ben, Sky, myself, you name it, you got it. Beat on, Rudy, and also make sure to check out the new tools we got. We have a really, really fun data tab where we're actually going to give you probably the best tools to set your lineups every single week. We're going to have the slot versus wide tool, which is one of the best points per game allowed, knowing where the defense allows fantasy points to wide receivers. It is literally just going above and beyond any other points per game allowed tool you can find. Then we're going to have the home and road splits. Really fun exercise, especially if you're trying to set that last flex spot. The home road is also a great one too. Wins and losses. I mean, this is going to be a really fun site to go to every single week. If you're stuck on your last, and you just need something to split the hairs, I guarantee you'll find it at razzball.com. So go check it out. And by the way, if you have a chance, we're doing a bunch of free offers right now for our premium subs. You get a week trial right now. So go jump over to razzball.com and check out our premium subs. We do have a lot of fun stuff and tools over there as well. All right, let's get to the last one, Derek. It's Tyjae Spears. And so all off season long, they keep telling you it's going to be a split. We're going to split the backfield. They love Tony Pollard. They love Tyjae Spears. Now, the irony is I kind of have a little bit of because of the new head coach, Callahan, I do think of this situation similar to the Bengals, where they had Brown, and then they brought in Zach Moss. Well, all you've been hearing all off season is that Brown, the incumbent, has been getting the first teams, most of them. That has not been the case here. Spears is the incumbent. Pollard came in, and Pollard is actually the 1A. And we saw that in the preseason. Yes, it was still a split. It was 8-6, Tony Pollard. But the reason why I'm a little concerned is even if it's a 55-45 split, or even if it gets closer to 60-40, you got to understand, historically speaking, what is the pie? What is the pie that running backs get, okay? So in the 5 seasons where Callahan was the OC for the Bengals, those teams averaged 22 PPR points per game out of the entire running back section, 22 fantasy points. If you just look over the last 3 seasons, more focused on when Burrow has been around, essentially, it jumps to 23.4. But what's 45% of 23.4? 10.5 fantasy points. Now, yes, at the end of the year, Spears might be a top 30-ish running back, but on a per-game basis, that's not going to win you your fantasy league. The other thing about Tony Pollard is a lot of people have a sour taste in their mouth, me included, after what happened last year. But he had a foot injury. And I forgot to bring this up with Tank Dell. Forget about all the competition stuff. He's coming off a fractured ankle. This is the same injury that Tony Pollard had a year prior. We all just kind of brushed it under the rug. Pollard even came out and said he didn't feel healthy towards the end of the season. If you watch him during the preseason this year, he looks like he has his bounce again. I don't think Pollard is washed at all, and I think that he will be the lead guy. On top of this, Spears made his hay last year, and of course they had Derrick Henry as a receiver. Well, they have added Ridley and Tyler Boyd, and hopefully when Hopkins comes back, you have 3 really good receivers. So on top of all that, you have to factor in, we don't even know if Will Levis is going to be good. Like, yes, let's be optimistic, of course. But like, I think he might be average. Like, I don't think Will Levis is going to be like Patrick Mahomes this year, right? So I don't know. And then you factor in, you go to PFF and you wander over to their offensive line rankings. The Titans are bottom 5. So I just not really that excited to take Spears this year. I kind of rather have guys like Ford. Give me Chase Brown. Give me those kind of running backs. And I probably think they have more upside. What's your thoughts here?
Yeah, so far these first 4, we've been in agreement on these fades. This is where we're going separate ways because I'm actually a little bit higher on Spears than you are, and I'll tell you why. And I cherry picked a few stats here to make my point. So last year as a rookie, he was 3rd on the team with 70 targets and 3rd on the team with 52 receptions. I agree. I think there will be a split with Pollard. 50-50 at best, probably 40-60 leaning Pollard's way. But I expect that to change, and here's why. Last year, again, as a rookie, he's a red zone threat. 33% of the touches in the red zone inside the 5. 20% of the team touches inside the 10. Broken tackle percentage, Spears 18%, Pollard is barely 14%. Average yards after catch, Spears over Pollard 3-2. So what I'm seeing here, again, cherry picked a few stats here to make my point, but what I'm seeing here is Spears in his second year is on the way up. Pollard, we saw indications last year. He's on the way down, and I'm not really sure how high he was to begin with to start his descent down. So I expect over the course of the season, we're going to see a lot more Spears, and Pollard will become the other down back to keep Spears fresh. So I'm drafting him, probably not as a starter, but I'm going to stash him, and I expect by mid-year he's probably going to be a starter for my team. So I am a little higher on Spears. I'm willing to take that chance, over someone like Brian Robinson or Zach Moss even. I'm going to take a chance on Spears before I draft one of those other running backs.
Okay. Jaylen Warren or Tyjae Spears?
I'd probably go Jaylen Warren.
Jerome Ford.
I do like Jerome Ford. I don't think Nick Chubb is going to be ready, and even if he is, he's not going to be back, to the Nick Chubb we love. So, yeah, I am high on Jerome Ford and that offensive line.
Yeah, because I'm looking at this now. I might be, and I think I've gone way too far. I have him at 127. His ADP's 100. I could probably get him to like the 115 because like guys like Zeke. Yeah, I don't know.
No,
I'd rather take the upside of Spears.
Yes, me
Gus
too.
Edwards, I have him below right now. I think J.K. Dobbins is probably going to be more involved potentially.
Yep. And I'd rather take the upside.
Yeah, same. So yeah, all right. I'll concede that I'm a little too low, but I just won't have any of it. I'm not going to take him like just around that range. I'm probably going to be taking guys like Chase Brown over him, and so that's probably I'll have very little of him, but. It is what it is. All right. That's all we got. Oh, by the way, we have Jamie one more time. Go ahead, Derek. Read it out for us.
Yeah. Spears late in a hero best ball with Breece Hall. I like that in a best ball. I think there's a very low risk to taking Spears on the best ball. I like that pick, Jamie.
Yeah, and I think when best ball has kind of clouded our perception of redraft because best ball, by the way, you could take swings on guys who are very volatile, right? And so, maybe some boom or bust guys
Gabe
that might
Davis.
hit home runs. Yeah. Gabe Davis, guys that might hit home runs more often than not. And I heard somebody once say, like, what does only good in best ball mean? I'm like, high A dot, low target guys. That's the definition of best ball guys. Yes. What are you talking about? Like, that's, guys who have, average, like Saquon Barkley types where like they are home run hitters, but they might only get 3 yards per carry for most of the game. Like those kind of guys, maybe who might only get 10 touches. Obviously not Barkley, of course, but I'm talking about the guys who might be Tyjae Spears types where are home run hitters. So overall, I agree. Might have to be, there's other guys I prefer in this range. I actually prefer Tony Pollard over Spears. I'm going to give it the benefit of the doubt last year. I'm going to say it was the foot injury. And by the way, if you watch the preseason, they did a good job mixing and matching. Spears was the third down guy, and Pollard did come in for the goal line snap, but they both played inside the 5. Figure that riddle out, folks. But hey, go check out my article. I broke it all down on Razzball.com. All right, before we close out the show, Derek, tell the people where they all can find your content. What do you got upcoming next?
Yeah, football.razzball.com. I'm still doing quarterback ranks, and you'll look for me. I'm getting ready to launch my DFS article and show. I'll be recording a DFS show, posting it the Saturday morning before Sunday kickoff. So look for that in the next week or so.
Grab a cup of Joe and come watch Derek talk about DFS every Saturday morning. And by the way, the next day, we'll be back on for Sunday Live Start Sit Show, folks. By the way, if you can't get enough of Razzball during the week and you're looking for something to do the few hours before kickoff, well, congratulations, you came to the right place. We do the Sunday Live Start Sit Show for 2 hours before kickoff. We break down key injuries, weather updates, everything you need to know up until kickoff. And more importantly, we answer all your start sit questions, a quad box. It is a lot of fun. So make sure you subscribe to the Razzball Fantasy YouTube channel. Make sure you jump over to IT and TikTok. And of course, make sure you go over to Razzball.com. We thank everybody for joining. Oh, okay. That is not appropriate. But that's all we got here, folks. But thank you for joining. We do appreciate it. And honestly, We're all swinging here, folks. So we are out of here.